Hey guys, sorry for the angle on this video. I'm flying solo today. We've been getting a lot of questions about what kind of strategy goes into a game of Clash Fighter. And what are you thinking about while you're playing cards? Are you just racing your opponent to build a better combo? How does it work? Well, you're definitely not in a race necessarily. What you need to do is you need to come up with the right distribution of cards around the board to make sure that you have both a strong amount of offense and a strong amount of defense in every plane. And to do that, you're going to need to think about a lot of different things while looking at your hand. Let's jump right in to some special moves. These are not character-specific special moves. These are available to every character in some form. Spielmeister will have some thematic changes, but in effect they'll be the same. So while you're playing, you'll start to intuit things like the sprite design, the name, the symbol, and when you see those in a flash, you'll think of what kind of strategies are available to you. And you'll start to intuit that, so while you're playing, you'll know right away, I have this card, I know what I can do with it. Do I want to keep it? Do I want to hold it? Do I want to play it now? Or do I want to discard it? So accelerate. Let's start with this one. When you're clashed, remember there are two phases in this game. The real-time phase and the clash resolution phase. In the real-time phase, you play cards full speed with no action restrictions to build your combo. And when you're ready to attack your opponent, you play a clash card, which initiates the clash resolution phase, where each player gets a turn to try to mitigate the damage they're going to take. And a lot of strategy goes into both phases, but different strategies depending on which phase you're in. So this is limited to a scenario where you've been clashed and you want to extend your combo. You want to accelerate your combo. So let's say you were planning something and it wasn't going well because you didn't have the right cards, and your opponent just took advantage of the fact that you didn't have enough cards down and played a quick combo on you. Well, you could turn the tables by playing this card and accelerating your combo by adding 2 extra cards to it that chain to it. However, you can't add any special moves or clash cards. So that's accelerate. Everybody has one. It's sort of a last-ditch defense before you go into a clash resolution phase. It gives you a couple of extra cards to add to your combo. Let's go on to parry. Parry seems simple at first. You play it and you nullify an entire plane, which applies to both players. So your attacks no longer have any power, but neither do your opponent. So you block a whole plane of cards. Now, you might save this for the clash resolution where you have only one action, so you might save it for if your opponent uses a brutal special move and gets the advantage on you in one plane. You might want to play this to block it out. But alternatively, you have another option. You can use this during real-time play. If you see that you're open in a plane and your opponent has exploited that, you can play parry and effectively forfeit the plane, but limit the battle to these 2 planes where you're not losing. So that gives you an extra defensive action. Rather than using this as your single defensive action, you can play it in anticipation during the real-time phase when you don't have an action cap. So a few things that go through your head when you see a parry card in your hand is that, do I hold this? Do I play it now? What is my opponent doing? How many cards does he have down? Where? Etc. So there's a range of things that go through your head when you see any given card, and that's a good example. Here's another good example, is the throw. The throw card creates a special circumstance where the game will stop when you play a throw. You don't have to chain it to any cards, like a lot of your special attack cards have to be chained. Doesn't follow those rules. The only imposition on it is the player's opponent must have 4 or less cards on the mat. If they have 5 or more cards, you can't play a throw on them. So when you play a throw, the game stops and you deal 2 damage to your opponent. However, the opponent can counter it with another throw and not take the damage. They can also use a light punch. And this card, therefore, has multiple functions as well. It's designated as a linker, meaning that it can just continue a combo in whatever plane you're in with 1 power / defense. So this will give you a 1 power, 1 defense linker. Or you can hold it, and when you're thrown, you play light punch, and you deal 1 damage to your opponent. That's an example of several different uses for these cards, but you can also store light punch and throw and wait for your opponent to throw you. In that case, you would throw back to cancel the throw. They might have another throw. If they do, they can throw you. You can light punch them. So you have several layers of throw defense if you choose to keep those in your hand. Or you can sacrifice your light punch in favor of continuing your combo. You'd have to make that call depending on what your opponent's doing and where you want your combo to go. If you want to exploit a hole somewhere, you might choose not to save your light punch, or if you want to make room in your hand, there's a lot of things you have to consider. And those 3 moves, the throw, accelerate, and parry, are, like I said, in everybody's hands. Let me show you something that is exclusive to Draw. All of these 3 character-specific special moves can't be found in anybody else's deck. And they distinguish Draw's playstyle, completely changing the way he plays cards, and all the strategy that you consider when playing as this character. And the same applies to anybody else. They will have a series of special moves that completely change the way they move around the board and the way you try to exploit your opponent's strategy. So you have to keep in mind who the opponent is playing as and who you're playing as to make sure that you can exploit the right gaps. But let's go into the specifics. Feint is a special move that will cancel the last card played and send it to the opponent's discard pile. When you use this card, you typically use it defensively, but it can be used offensively, so it has a couple of layers. Normally, you would hold this card for Clash Resolution phase, and if a player used a card you didn't like, you could feint it and not take the damage. But you can also cancel a clash by feinting a clash and resume real-time play. You can also cancel a throw with this card, and you can use it offensively during real-time play. Let's say that your opponent has 3 cards down and you only have 2. Well, you can feint their last card played, and if you have a regular clash, something like this in your hand, you can then, once they've cleared their card, you can clash them. You've now gotten a 1-card lead on your opponent, which may not necessarily be a good thing, depending on who you're playing against, or what your power values are. But the point is that feint has a lot of different uses, depending on the circumstances. It can be used to stop your opponent from building a bigger combo than you. You can disrupt them. You can cancel their last move played. You can stop a clash. So, even though it seems like it has one use, the way you use it can drastically change the outcome of the game. I'll tell you a little bit more about regular attacks after I go through Draw's special moves. So, Draw's special moves are kind of 2 sides of the same coin. You have Ambush, which is the offensive side, and Scorched Earth, which is the defensive side. The trick with Draw is that you must play cards face down. You must play his special move cards face down. So the opponent never knows what's coming. You can play them in the same plane, in which case you can either bluff by playing the same card in the same plane. So they might think that they're looking at an ambush when you really have 2 Scorched Earth cards, which would just be a bluff. They would then assume that you don't have your 2 ambush cards. So you can use this flipping mechanic, in other words, itself as a strategic element of your combo. But specifically, Scorched Earth is a card that when you play it face down will deal 2 damage to your opponent if you're losing in the plane that it's played. So on the flip side, you have Ambush, where you can move your cards from one plane to an adjacent plane once it's flipped. The opponent doesn't know which is which. In the case of the opponent being low on power, if they take 2 damage because they beat you in a plane and you flip this card, you can theoretically kill them. That would deal chip damage, 2 chip damage, in other words, damage that can't be blocked, and they might lose, so that completely changes the way they play, and it influences their strategy and yours. Ambush can completely change the dynamics of the combo because you can suddenly be in another plane completely and overwhelm your opponent. It also changes how they figure their attacks. You can also ambush a Scorched Earth to another plane, therefore adding some damage in if you're losing. So there's a lot of things a player might consider when looking at either of these 2 cards. You kind of have to think of them together because that's what your opponent is going to be thinking. They don't know which is Scorched Earth, which is Ambush. And like I said, you can exploit that by playing a bluff of 2 of these cards so that they think it's an ambush when it's really another Scorched Earth. You have 2 of each in your deck. In which case you'd have 2 ambushes, so you could interchange cards with 2 ambush cards between all the planes, and your opponent would have no idea. That's a rare circumstance because you'd have to get all 4 of the cards in your deck, and that would severely limit your mobility. But the options are there if you play your cards right, and you do it fast. That's Draw's mechanics. You play your regular attack cards in advance of using a special move. You'd have to play all your attack cards in advance of playing Ambush, knowing that you were going to move them somewhere. You can also play Ambush at the end of your attack cards because you can bait an opponent into that spot. So if you played several attacks consecutively on one plane, you would suddenly be overwhelming your opponent. Your opponent would think, I need to move to that plane to make sure that I can block all that damage. Okay, when they do that, you play Ambush. Now they have to react to Ambush. They have to react to the adjacent plane, in other words, because you can now take all the cards you played on that plane and move them over here. So you can really play a lot of mind games with Draw that are present with other characters in different forms. But his bluff mechanic really focuses on surprise and strategy, and you have to use that to maximum advantage. And it requires you to play your attack cards. Here's a couple examples. Strategically. So, Draw has cards that are limited to the low plane. He has a launcher limited to the low plane. His clash is limited to the high planes, the high and the jump. He's got multiple clashes though, so you have different options. But each attack card, regular attack card, which will be light, strong, and fierce punch. Same for kicks. Those will be weighted differently in terms of power, where you can play them, and what options they give you depending on the character. That'll help define how the character moves around the board. So you'll have to play differently as far as moving your cards, depending on who you are as well, which is another strategy to consider. So when you're looking at an attack card, let's take a look at this one. This is a launcher. You would play a launcher, and you're forced to play it low because it's shaded out on the bottom there. You see that shaded out low plane. You would play that low. Once you play a launcher, you are now in the jump plane. So your next card has to be played in the jump plane. This is a combo continuer, so it can be played as your next card. It has to be played here because this last card forced you to be there. Now, what you have here is a 2 power and 2 defense card in the low plane and the same circumstance in the jump plane. Alternatively, I could have used this as a clash -1, where my 2 power would have become 1 had I chosen to use this as a clash. That's something you have to consider when playing is, do I want to end this combo quickly before I let my opponent get the jump on me, in which case I'll play a clash -1. Sacrifice a little bit of power in favor of speed. These are the decisions you'll have to make. But as you're chaining your combo, you'll find yourself thinking about, okay, I need to make sure that my attacks are going to sufficiently cover all 3 planes because they're going to give me, that way, enough defense and enough attack to make sure that I can't be overwhelmed. And you're going to need to think about when can you use something like ambush to play it on this card and move it over here. Do you want to play it real time and then use it later to go like that? Or do you want to hold on to it because then you can see what your opponent does and react to it. When your opponent plays a card you don't like, and maybe they're open in another plane, and you decide you're going to take their damage, whatever it happens to be, you can play ambush as a defensive action, single defensive action, as opposed to playing it face down to use it later whenever you want for no action. And you can move your card over here. So you have to think about these things when you're putting attack cards down. Or using special moves. You have to think about, are you in real time, are you in clash resolution, and what you're going to do when you're in clash resolution, when you're playing in real time. So I hope that gives you an idea of the breadth of strategies that will come into play when you're looking at your hand. And I hope you guys enjoy the game when you get it to the table. We're really close on Kickstarter, so let's take it home.